When it comes to retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez, founder and managing member of ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement plan at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hat and get ready to take back control of your retirement today and for all the tomorrows to come. ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now. Coming to you from the ILG Financial Studios, this is Retire Your Way, the podcast that gives you the straight talk and honest insight you need to help you achieve your financial goals through smart investing and careful planning. My name is Jeff Shade, and as always, I'm just here to ask the questions, but the words of wisdom and solid advice come from Dave Lopez, managing member and owner of ILG Financial. How you doing today, Dave?
I'm good. We're through the series that we just finished, so we're off to new territory. Boy, I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, likewise too, Dave, and that was a great series on the economic cracks in America's foundation. We really explored a lot of interesting stuff there, and although we're in challenging times right now, I mean, America has always endured, and I have faith that we're going to endure this as well too.
You know what? I echo that. I have no concerns that the United States is going to come through any of these economic hardships, and we will be stronger 50 years from now than we are now. I really believe that. The challenge is that's the macro scale, right? Everything we're talking about in a very selfish way is about our customers, our clients, and you, the listeners, which is, you can hear all these stories of, we came through World War II and 50 years later, we're much better for it, right? But many people lost their lives, many people lost their fortunes and became homeless. So it's about learning on a microeconomic scale how to protect yourself from these major fluctuations that happen on a macro level so that you and your family can come out unscathed and with luck live the retirement you want to live and then pass on money to your heirs if that's important to you, regardless of what 20 or 30-year window of the economic cycle you happen to be in.
Well, Dave, I agree with you completely. I mean, I think about people during the Depression, and, it seemed that this would never end if you were in the Depression. And, I mean, some people were jumping out windows, but just imagine what they missed. I mean, the greatness that America became. And as you said, I'm really, really confident that this is a blip on the radar. We'll get through this. We've gotten through so many things before, so I'm looking forward to a very bright future. And, of course, you can always make it brighter if you have a plan. You listen to podcasts like this, so we'll tell people how they can get their plan going at no cost and no obligation just a little bit later in the program. Dave, the topic of today's podcast is going to be what happens when someone dies and there is unpaid debt. Does it fall on the surviving spouse or the children or the heirs?
Boy, that's a great question. So the answer is it depends. It depends on state laws and regulations. It depends on the type of debt. But the big overview is when you die, just for those of you who don't know this, is the government says that you, Jeff, have an estate, and the estate is your personal assets, no matter the size, no matter if you've got $50 million in assets or $50 in assets. It includes your financial accounts, your possessions, any real estate, boats, cars, any of that. After death, anything that's left over in your name is considered part of your estate. Now, creditors are going to go after your estate to collect any money that's owed after death. That's the first place they're going to kind of go after. So what we want to do when we're building plans, and this is why this stuff is so important, is that we want to make sure that if we think there is debt, we want as little to show up in your estate as possible and as much to be protected and skip the estate and go right to your heirs, right? Because the creditors can go after the estate.
So, Dave, are surviving spouses or other beneficiaries, are they really responsible for this debt?
Well, in most cases, Jeff, the answer to that's no. So let's talk about some basics. Earlier, we were just talking about that, we were talking about the estate. Well, when you die, your estate goes into what we call probate. So probate is basically the government formally approving your will and saying this is a valid document, undisputed. But also what they're doing is they go through the process of paying off all your debt. So when you go through probate, for anyone who has not gone through it, you know that you will have an executor of your estate, which means that's really the person in charge of going through this process with the government and the creditors to make sure everything goes smoothly. So they have to do the processing, the administrative work of managing your estate through the probate process. And in this process, you're going to have to be, as the executor, paying off the debt of your dead heir, your dead relative, and distribute and selling assets to create cash to pay off debt. And that happens before the heirs get anything. Once all the debt's paid off, anything left in your estate will then go to the heirs that the will indicates should get it.
All right, so there are different types of debt that you can have when you die. I mean, having a little money left on a mortgage is one thing, but having credit card debt is another. Having a lease on a car is yet another thing too. So I think you've really got to kind of figure out a way to save what's important. And I would, go for the mortgage or go for the house first thing. What are some of the different types of scenarios that you see?
Well, that's a good question. So let's talk about a couple. So not all of a person's assets are counted in their estate for probate. And boy, is that an important thing to take away. So if anything that you can get to avoid probate basically can go right to your heirs and avoid this risk of losing money to the debt. And I'll give you a couple examples. Life insurance policies and qualified retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, Roth IRAs, things like that. Actually, they avoid probate, Jeff. They go right to the heirs. Annuities are a great example. Annuities have beneficiaries like life insurance policies. They avoid probate and they go right to the heirs, which means that they're going to avoid any claim by a creditor to get to those, because as of the date of death, they become the heir's property. These assets go directly to the person named as the beneficiary. They are not subject to probate. So there's a great example. That's why it is so important, and you hear us talking about it literally every week, to come in and build out a plan, because it's just not, what's my rate of return, which most folks focus on. But if you're getting a great rate of return, but you've got your money in the wrong vehicle, so it's all exposed at probate to debtors, and you've run up some big debt, or there's a claim against you for some reason, a lawsuit or something, doesn't matter how good the return is, you lose it all. Whereas if that money, for example, had been funneled into life insurance, even if the return were a little less, if it avoids the claims from the lawsuits or everything like that, the kids are going to get much more money. So there's a perfect example of rate of return is one of many aspects you have to look at in your total plan when you're accounting the goals of your plan, whether it's for you to have the money protected to spend or whether it's to pass on to your heirs.
So life insurance, annuities, those sort of things are not subject to the creditors, if I'm hearing you correctly, Dave. What happens if someone passes away, they leave debt, but their estate just doesn't have enough money to pay the debt? They're insolvent.
Yeah, so if they're insolvent, that just means, again, the plain English explanation for that is that there aren't enough assets to pay off the liabilities. So let's say, Jeff, if you passed away and I'm the executor of your estate and we just don't have a lot, right? So we liquidate what we can, we pay off the debt we can have, but anything that's left, usually that the creditors can't go any further than the estate. So Jeff, any money that transferred to your heirs through beneficiaries on your IRAs or your 401ks or a beneficiary on an annuity or beneficiary on a life insurance policy, any of that stuff is completely shielded from those creditors. They're just going to have to eat the loss, and your creditors get that money.
We're talking about what happens with unpaid debt when a person dies here on Retire Your Way with Dave Lopez, and I want to continue this conversation, Dave. But before that, I want to remind our listeners today that at a time when the world feels like it's just filled with fear and panic, we remain calm. When others are making rash decisions based on emotions, we remain vigilant and committed to sound strategy. At ILG Financial, we're dedicated to helping our clients achieve their retirement goals through any type of challenge. We were here to help our clients through the Great Recession, and we're here now to help you get through this dark time as well. Nothing lasts forever, and we'll recover from this, so it's important not to panic. If you're not confident in your current plan, have concerns about your exposure to market volatility, or you're worried about your retirement income, we're here for you. So let's help bring some answers answers to your questions by starting with a second opinion review. We'll sit down together to help bring some clarity to the current state of your retirement plan. Find confidence and leadership right here at ILG Financial. And you can contact us through the red footer on our website, which is ilgfinancial.com, and someone will get right back to you within 24 hours. Or, of course, you can always give us a call here at the office. That number, 540-720-5656. 540-720-5656. So, Dave, let's continue our conversation about unpaid debt after death. Now, let's talk about community property states. First of all, is the Commonwealth of Virginia a community property territory?
It is not. Let's define that. When we talk about community property, the concept of community property is that all of the possessions of a married couple are divided equally, which basically means if you're in a community property state and your husband dies, for example, all of those assets are liable to creditors, even stuff that's in your name only. Luckily, Virginia, and most states actually, but Virginia is instead a marital property state, which basically means the surviving spouse has many more protections, specifically for stuff that's in their name only.
So if a spouse dies, and let's say that there is debt on a car loan or something, and they took that car loan out in their own name, if you're in a community property state such as California, state of Washington or something, the surviving spouse would be responsible for that. But here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, that is not the case. Does this mean that the surviving spouse would be responsible to pay all the deceased spouse's debt?
Well, only to the extent that any property that's in both names or property that's in only the deceased spouse's name, those assets are going to be liable in probate for the debt. But anything in, let's just give an example, Jeff, if you passed away, any accounts in your wife's name, if you lived in Virginia, are protected. Anything that you had in life insurance would go right to your wife as the beneficiary is protected. An annuity with your wife as the beneficiary is protected. Your IRAs and 401ks with your wife as the beneficiary, protected. But if you had an account in joint names, then that may be liable for the creditors to get to, right? So any joint accounts might be liable. Any real estate that was in both names might be liable as the debt. And then that has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But you know what the big takeaway here is, Jeff? And I hate to beat the drum again, but boy, this is so important. Hopefully what folks are seeing when you're listening to this is, look how many moving parts we've got as you enter retirement. So much more than just what to invest in. All of your plans can go to naught if you haven't fixed just one of these little items or addressed them. So one of the things we do at ILG Financial is not just where's the best investment for your money right now, but we actually plan on being your advisor throughout the rest of your life and then helping transition your heirs and move this money as efficiently as possible from you to your heirs based on your wishes. And part of that is making sure that your heirs don't miss a critical piece of information as far as how this stuff is titled or how beneficiaries are listed, so that we can maximize what the heirs get, minimize what Uncle Sam gets, and protect as much of it as possible from any existing debt.
Dave, final question here. What about federal student loans? If the deceased has a federal student loan, how is that handled?
Luckily, unlike most forms of debt, federal student loans are forgiven if the student dies. Parent Plus loans is another example. That's a loan often held by parents to help pay for education expenses. If something happened, that debt is discharged, which means forgiven, if either the student or the parent who took out the loan passes away. So there's a little silver lining there in the debt, at least with the government loans.
So Dave, we've talked about a lot of things here as far as estate planning and, what happens when someone dies and leaves debt. What's the big takeaway from all this?
Well, we talked about some generalities and how things work, but the really important thing I want everyone to hear, and just as a reminder, we always talk about disclosures and disclaimers, but here, boy, this is as important as it ever is, which is we cannot give you all the nuances on how your accounts are going to work and how your probate's going to work in a 15 to 20 minute podcast. The information that we went over today is very general, and this goes to the legal side of our estate planning. Now, we have attorneys that we work in partner with, and when you meet with us, when we start to do that part of the estate planning, we actually include the attorneys because that's their area of expertise. So don't take any of the information we went over today as gospel gospel that you will go out and build your plan on. The takeaway isn't to listen to this podcast and build out a plan. The takeaway is to come into the office and let's build a comprehensive plan, because you don't know what you don't know. And then as necessary, we will get the appropriate financial experts involved. For example, accountants and attorneys when necessary. So depending on what's necessary with your specific situation, we know who to get to make sure that all the questions are answered and we can give you the best chance at success.
So even though Virginia is not a community property territory, unlike California and Washington, still very important to have an estate plan. And I think anybody getting into retirement should take a look at their debt situation and make sure that they can pay that down as much as possible. Some people just can't if you've got a large mortgage, something like that. But I think really the takeaway is to have a workable plan, to get an estate plan. And of course, they're at ILG Financial. Dave, I know you do that sort of thing. So I'm going to encourage our listeners to give you a call, 540-720-5656 to get their estate plan, or just to get a financial plan in general. But once again, that number 540-720-5656, or of course they can click on the little red footer here on the website at ilgfinancial.com. Dave, out of time for this week. Thank you so much for your time. I want to thank the listeners for their time and invite them to join us again next time with another edition of Retire Your Way with Dave Lopez. Have a great day.
The information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and not necessarily represent the views of AlphaStar Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through AlphaStar Capital Management, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability. AlphaStar and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities.